Chapter 4. Inside the firehouse, it was blessedly warm, and the howling gale of the blizzard was muffled. There was a workbench set up against the wall, and Klein put the Garen and his sling pack down on it. He saw a radio and turned it on. The radio automatically scanned for an active frequency, and he heard a woman giving some blizzard survival tips. It was badly garbled, and the reception faded in and out, but she was there. It was nice to hear a friendly voice. Klein took a deep breath and ran his fingers through his hair, brushing out the snow before it could melt. He studied the rifle and thought about what he had encountered so far. The snow and the cold hadn't driven everyone inside or underground. There were still plenty of hostiles out there. The M1 Garand was better than nothing, but he needed to find a way to improve his lethality, or this hike was going to take way too long. Klein remembered the forsaken M4. He stripped it, cleaned the parts, found a replacement trigger, and put it back together, slapping in a new mag and cycling the bolt. It felt janky, but it would do for now. Klein examined the suppressor he had found. The barrel of the M1 was the right fit, but it hadn't been threaded so that the suppressor could screw on. The M4's barrel was threaded, but it was the wrong size. He sighed and tossed it into his bag. It might come in handy later. Klein reached into his left thigh carrier and pulled out some of the curved magazines for the M4. He took 2 magazines, laid one on top of the other, in parallel. He needed something to separate the magazines from each other, just 1/4 of an inch or so. He looked around and found a wooden yardstick in the corner and brought it to the bench. He pulled out the screwdriver and used it to scratch 4-inch lengths on the yardstick. Then he held it on the edge of the table with one hand, sawed into one side with the tool for a few strokes, halfway through, and then he snapped it off. He did this a few times, and then he used the superglue to attach the magazine on both sides of the small piece of wood. After the glue had cured for a couple minutes, he used the duct tape to make the connection between the magazines stronger. And now he had a couple quick change magazines. He could fire 30 seconds, reach up and quickly switch to the second mag. He would be ready to fire much faster than his opponents would. Klein nodded to himself, pleased with his work. His elbow and tricep was throbbing again after the crafting work, and he held it for a moment. Isaac popped up. Infection detected. SHD agent smartwatches had the same tech as the Fitbit, but Klein hadn't known that it could detect infections just from the laser on his wrist. Well, he knew it was coming, and it didn't change anything. He decided to ditch the double-barreled shotgun he had found. It would be best to engage at a distance. He slung the M4, popped some painkillers, and slipped out of the hideout, M1 in his hands. Outside, the gusts of the blizzard tugged on his clothes and whistled in his ears. Wearing the biohazard suit in the blizzard felt about the same as wearing a Ziploc bag in the blizzard, but the pants and scarf were helping. There was a safe house just off the street next to Stuyvesant Park called the Last Call, because it had been a bar. The alcohol was long gone, but it was still one of the nicest safe houses to just sit back and try to feel like a human again. They sang drinking songs there sometimes, without the alcohol, just to remember how it felt. Klein flipped up his holographic map for a moment and cocked his head, frowning. The safe house was not appearing on his map. He started jogging down the street towards the police station. He turned right just before the park and went up the steps, and saw that the doors to the safe house were closed. All the safe houses would have batted down the hatches for the blizzard, and it was late. They weren't opening for anyone right now. Klein came back to Stuyvesant Park and swung through the northern side of it. Stuyvesant Square Park had been converted into a Sierra depot at one point. but the fence had been bent down at the northeastern corner during a riot. Most of the supplies had been emptied from the Sarah tents inside, but he found a syringe of pain meds and a can of beans. There were probably more things in the park he could scavenge, but he wanted to keep moving and felt certain that there were thugs lurking around. They might have more valuable gear or guns, but Klein was still under-geared and didn't want to risk any shooting and drawing more attention. He left the park and found a pile of abandoned suitcases on the west side that looked promising. He looked through one of the cases, found a mesh cap that left his ears exposed, but it was better than nothing. Then he ran across the road and up the street towards the police station. Klein was coming up on the rear entrance of the station. There were a few abandoned cop cars in the street outside. Someone had left the rotating police lights on, and the foggy, snow-filled air was filled with soft red and blue glows. The police station was all red brick and looked old, like most of the buildings in the area. There was a Sarah State banner that had been hung above the parking garage door, and the Rikers target site symbol had been spray-painted over it, as well as JTF ain't shit on the wall above it. Klein was almost freezing again. He tried the back door, but it was locked. He tucked the M4 into his shoulder and walked down the ramp to the parking garage, shivering but alert. Isaac called out another warning. To one side of the ramp, someone had set another booby trap, and Klein kept clear of it. He focused on any sounds coming from inside the garage. Just as he reached the bottom of the ramp, he heard, "Just can't understand a flamethrower, guys." He took a long breath and moved cautiously into the garage. The cold wasn't so oppressive now that Klein was out of the wind chill. There was an empty security booth and a dark SUV next to it at the entrance of the garage. Klein took cover there. He didn't see anyone yet, but he knew what he heard. Someone was down there, talking to at least one other person. There was trash and graffiti all over down here. Some Rikers had been using this place as a hangout, judging from the graffiti and their perverse delight in taking police gear. There were several pallets of canned food and boxes of supplies down here as well. The cons had a good reason for holding on to this place. He quietly moved from the SUV to take cover behind the supply pallets. "The cleaners! Those guys are true believers," another voice said. Klein peeked from the shadows and could see two Rikers coming out of the far corner of the garage where some couches were. The two of them stopped about 25 feet away and leaned up against the crate, folding their arms to conserve body heat. Then a third and fourth appeared, coming out of the shadows. Rikers weren't very disciplined or trained as a rule, but they were savage, unpredictable, and could be very nasty customers. They were mostly escaped prisoners from Rikers Island prison, hence the name. But nowadays, there were more and more, some that had been pressed into the gangs or joined for protection. Klein breathed out slowly, getting ready. 10 feet away from the doorway into the basement of the police station, the double doors standing open. There was a chance he could just slip into the station unseen and avoid a fight. He waited for a moment when it seemed safe, and he crept to the doorway. No such luck. One of the Rikers yelled, and 2 shots buzzed past him. Klein took a position inside the doorway, put the M1 rifle to his shoulder, and leaned out to aim. He put 2 shots into one of them, and he dropped. He missed the next shot, but put a 4th shot into the second Riker, who took cover with a howl of pain. Klein pulled back into cover. He slung the M1 and pulled up the M4. They peppered his cover with pistol shots, and one of them had an automatic rifle, something that fired slower than his M4, probably an AK-47. He waited. "There's only one!" someone yelled. Footsteps were coming closer. Klein leaned out, aimed down the iron sights of the M4, and opened fire. This M4 fired 45mm bullets. It was a compact version of the M16 designed for close-quarter fighting and battles just like this. He fired 6 rounds into the Riker, blowing him off his feet and onto his back, then sighted back to the next one. The others were already scrambling for cover. Klein waited for them to peek out and took them out quickly. The quick-change magazine helped. They were accustomed to easier targets. The police station was empty and eerie. All the doors were open, even the jail cells. It was a mess, but it was mostly intact, just abandoned. Klein kept feeling like someone was going to come around the corner and yell at him for being here. Maybe the Rikers felt the same way, and that's why they had been in the garage instead of the station. Seeing the abandoned hallways and rooms had already been picked over, but he was able to find some good knee pads, 2 tear gas grenades, and a soldering kit. There was another hideout just south of the police station. Klein wondered if they had had any spare parts for a pulse unit. With the pulse, he would be a far deadlier opponent, with whatever guns or gear he might find along the way. Chapter 5. Klein went down the alley across the street from the police station and saw a unique light hanging above the back door of the store. The light created an orange circle of light on the ground, like the glowing orange circle on the SHD devices. He used his lockpick gun on the back door and found a crafting bench in the back room. He peeked into the store and saw the hideout had been a Milton Shelton jewelry store. Every single case had been smashed, and all the glittering little diamonds had been looted. Klein chuckled at how useless this robbery had been. The looters must have been disappointed to realize that the entire store of diamonds fetched perhaps a couple of tanks of gas, at most, in the post-pandemic economy. Klein changed out of his basic knee pads, scraped up from the crash, with the SWAT knee pads he found in the station. He still needed the better tack vest, backpack, and gloves, but his resourcefulness seemed to be paying off. But in order to get into the dark zone, he needed to find or craft a virus filter to replace the face mask that broke during the crash. Klein reached up to his right shoulder and unclipped the ISIC device from the shoulder on his sling pack strap. The ISIC device was dark charcoal gray, about 6 inches long, thick in the middle but tapering at the ends with a long, flat antenna sticking out of the side and a glowing orange circle on top. It had a few new scratches from the helicopter crash, but was relatively unscathed. What was missing was the pulse attachment. The ISIC device could connect with various external modules to give SHD agents useful abilities in the field. The pulse device was a CD player-sized package that was attached to the backpack and sent out sonic pulses to show the agent where people were, even through floors and walls, but only for a handful of seconds. It used a lot of battery power and took some time to recharge the ability, so the pulse had to be used wisely. There were half a dozen other devices with defensive or offensive uses. Mini turrets that could help the agent flank or distract the enemy until it ran out of ammo. A mini launcher that could shoot either sticky bombs or first aid nanite canisters, and more. In the hideouts, an SHD agent could usually find a few of the various tech modules. They were left there in case operators wanted to switch abilities out in the field, and luckily, Klein found a pulse module. He put in fresh batteries, synced it up with his ISIC, clipped everything to his sling pack, and moved out. There was another decision to make now. He had mostly traveled west, and the 31st Street checkpoint was almost directly northwards from this hideout. He could start heading north on 3rd Street and cut over to Park Avenue on the way to the checkpoint. This was the simplest and most direct way to get there. But he was having decent luck with his current strategy of hitting nearby locations where he knew supplies could be found. So, door number 2. There was a nearby office building between 20th and 21st. where he was almost certain to find some good gear, food, and other sundries. Plus, it was across from a hospital, where he might find more painkillers and, if he was lucky, some penicillin. Thinking of painkillers, Klein squeezed his elbow and winced. He felt the syringe in his pocket. He needed to be careful with his pain management if he was going to see the mission through, but he decided to save it for later. It wasn't feeling too bad at the moment. A third option was to go to Union Square. Union Square had been turned into a huge supply depot, staging area, and body collection site. Pallets of supplies and Sarah coffins were all over the place, being watched over by a statue of George Washington. There was an open-air pavilion at the north end that was sure to have some good items. There were also subway tunnels below that could be easier to loot, if only because he wouldn't have to struggle through the cold winds. It was usually guarded by JTF, but Klein was sure they would all be indoors by now. So that meant hostiles would be there, trying to find something for themselves. And it would be a lot of searching and mucking around when he needed to be getting closer to the dark zone, sooner than later. Klein decided on door number 2. He left, heading up 3rd Avenue. As he came upon 20th Street, there was a small truck abandoned in the middle of the intersection, the back open towards him. He was about to turn left west onto 20th, but noticed a red bag inside the back of the truck. He hopped up and searched the bag, finding another pack of pain pills. When he jumped down to the street, there was something moving in the street on his left, to the east. As he looked, he realized with rising concern that it was 5 figures coming up the street from the other side of the police station he had recently been in. One of them saw him and called out, "There!" And they all started running. He brought up his M4, and then, in his peripheral vision, noticed 3 more figures coming south down 3rd Avenue towards him. They were all Rikers, and he needed a tactical advantage to take on this many at the same time. The middle of the intersection was not the place to be. Klein turned and ran. He saw an auto repair shop on the corner, light spilling out into the street out of the 3 sliding garage doors. He ran inside and headed for the back entrance. "Caution, multiple traps reported in this vicinity," Isaac told him. Klein hesitated, then saw it right next to the open back door of the shop. Klein heard shouting and shots being fired out in the street. The Rikers were trying to bring anyone who could hear to help chase him down. In that moment, 3 thugs with golf clubs came running into the garage. Klein turned and jogged towards the doorway, through one of the car lifts, letting them get closer. As he drew near the explosive trap, at the last moment, he ran full speed through the doorway, triggering the trap. By the time the thugs came running after him and realized the danger, it was already exploding. They screamed and tried to put out the flames as they burned, as he looked around to make his next move. Klein felt panic rising. He had run into an open-air area behind the shop, used for storage and break times. There were no exits. There wasn't even any decent cover. But there was a maintenance ladder. It went up 2 stories, and though he might just get shot in the ass, he started climbing quickly. Sure enough, when he was about halfway up, a couple more Rikers came into the area behind the shop. Where'd he go?" "Up there," someone replied, and Klein climbed faster. Shots whizzed past him and blew off chunks of brick as he pulled himself over the edge. He leaned over to aim and return fire, trying to pick off just one before he continued running. But at least 3 guns went off, firing at his head, and he made a hasty retreat. Klein turned and saw the apartment building next door rising up above the car shop another 3 stories, and a ladder going up to the fire escape. There was random graffiti and another booby trap at the base of the ladder. He drew his pistol, firing and detonating the trap before he jogged over. He fired a few shots towards the open courtyard area below as well, just to slow them down. His hazmat top was trapping some body heat, but only when he was still. All the running and gunning and climbing had him sweating, but as he moved, his body heat escaped and the cold winds were freezing that sweat. He was shivering from the cold. As he climbed up the ladder, Klein noticed a huge billboard for the Shortbows hockey team on the side of the much taller building nearby. "This Christmas, the game changes," the billboard touted. He wondered if that game had taken place as he pulled himself up the ladder and began running to the fire escape. "Here!" came a voice from the street below, and some automatic rifles began firing on him from the street outside the shop. His situation was not improving. Klein ran up the steps of the fire escape, looking up as he went to see how he would get off at the top. There was a big window at the top, and that was about it. Bullets were hitting the steel and the fire escape all around him as he kept running. When he got to the top, he drew his pistol and turned and shot out the window, doing a dive roll over the still into the apartment. Klein got to his feet, panting. He could still hear the bullets hitting the side of the building, but now he was in cover. Getting out of the freezing winds was an added benefit. He didn't risk looking back down towards the roof, but he could hear them shouting to each other and knew that they were coming up after him. He moved through the apartment, looking for a way out, and anything that might be of use. There was a broken window on the other side of the building, opening up onto another rooftop. He moved towards it, but saw a respirator mask someone had left on the seat of a chair and grabbed it, stuffing it into his pack to examine later. At least 5 Rikers were still chasing him, and the further away he could get from them, the better. So he climbed out of the window onto the rooftop. The rooftop was expansive, with an even taller building right next to it on the west and northeast sides. There were a bunch of large industrial HVAC ducts and chillers on the roof. Klein looked back and realized this could be a good bottleneck. If he could take cover against the ducts, he could pick off any pursuers coming through the window from here. Klein hit his pulse, and his eyesight vibrated for a moment. In his augmented contact lens displays, he saw a ring of light rush out from him. Through the walls, he could see little red figures climbing up the ladder to the roof of the auto shop. But there were red triangles at the edge of his vision, pointing towards targets behind him. Klein quickly turned and saw 4 more Rikers just a split second before they saw him. He dove for cover on the other side of the big duct as one of them yelled, "Look out!" Bullets were already hitting his cover, and he needed to get out of here. More thugs were coming out of the woodwork every minute. Klein thought fast. Despite the pulse showing him the positions of all nearby hostiles, there were too many. This was going to get messy, soon. He remembered he had been up on this roof before, and there had been rappel lines on both the north and south side of the rooftop. He had just come from the street to the south. There might still be 1 Riker or 2 on the street that was sure to see him, but if he could get to the north side quickly, the Rikers had no rappelling gear and he might be able to lose them if he kept moving. He lifted his M4 over his head and blind fired in the direction of the Rikers as he crouch walked to the north along the ducts, making the Rikers stay in cover. Then he ran and jumped over the duct to take cover again as they leaned out and started shooting at his position. He crouch walked a bit more, blind firing over his cover again and then getting behind an industrial chiller, quick loading the second magazine as he went. He looked back in time to see 2 Rikers come out of the same window he had just used to step out onto the rooftop, and he knew it was time to go. Klein ran around the chiller towards the north rappel line, shooting a few rounds at a Riker, but it was mostly to scare him. It was nearly impossible to aim while running for your life. He slung the M4 and grabbed the repeller of the cross strap of his sling pack as he ran. Just as he got to the rope, he felt a bullet clip his pack and another graze his thigh. The pain registered, but he had to grit his teeth and keep moving. He clipped the repeller onto the rope, leaned out, and rappelled down 5 stories in about 3 seconds, slowing and stopping as he got to the street level. As he unclipped, he looked behind him, towards the hospital across the street. A police SUV sat askew in the street, and a small freight truck was parked at the curb. And just as Klein turned around, another Riker walked out from behind the truck. Klein smoothly brought up his M4 and put 3 rounds into the Riker's head before he could do anything, but realized halfway through the action that he should have tried to do something quieter. With his current luck, there were probably 5 more hostiles nearby. Klein was freezing again now, shivering from the cold. He limped across the street, considering his options. He had a Medipen that he could use. These were like an EpiPen and had a spectrum of helpful drugs that gave the user immediate boosts of adrenaline and stimulants, but he didn't want to use it until he had to. If he went down for any reason, the Medipen might be the only thing that could get him back up. The Rikers on the rooftop behind him started yelling and trying to shoot down at him. He tried to look up the street to the east, but couldn't see far enough with all the snow to know if more Rikers were coming yet, but he would assume they were. The doors to the medical center were closed and blocked off, but there was an ambulance under the large awning and there was a broken-out window above. Someone had gone through some trouble to get up there. There was some risk. He would be exposed as he climbed up, but the range was far enough that it was worth it. Klein climbed up as fast as he could, his injured elbow complaining while bullets hit the walls around him as he went. The top of the ambulance, up the awning, on top of some piece of HVAC machinery, and then he was pulling himself over to the windowsill and into the building. Klein was in a hallway choked with wheelchairs, gurneys, and other equipment. Bullets were hitting the building, and a few just went through the window and hid inside the room, clanging off the metal of some of the medical equipment. He went to the doorway to his left and got out of the line of fire from the open window and found himself on the landing of a staircase. Inside, the cold wasn't as bad, but he wasn't out of the woods yet. He sat down on the stairs and looked at his leg. Fortunately, there were 2 holes in his pant leg. The bullet had gone through and just grazed his thigh. It was bleeding, but not badly. Klein found some alcohol, gauze, and medical tape and patched himself up in a minute. Down the stairs was a hallway with a Licks soda machine, and he used a trick another agent had taught him weeks ago. The vending machine would let a can go if you pounded it in just the right place. He went back to the stairs, sat down, fished a granola bar out of his sling pack, and had a snack, washing it down with the soda. It only took about 5 minutes, but he began to breathe easier and relax. The whole time, he had kept his ears peeled, but nothing concerning seemed to be coming. Yet. Klein grabbed his M4 and went down the hall. There were a couple of dead bodies wrapped up on the floor. He noticed an emergency fire axe on the wall. The glass had been smashed and the axe was missing. The hallway came to a doorway and opened into a skyway over 22nd Street to the next building, but the doorway on the other side had been boarded up. Klein looked eastward and saw 5 Rikers coming down the street in his direction. He ducked down, but not before one of them called out and some bullets were fired in his direction. Shit! Klein could go back and exit the building the way he came in. He might lose the Rikers that way, but there could be more Rikers on 21st Street. He wished he had a mini turret at least to hold him off for a minute, to help him escape. He pictured where he was on the map of the city in his mind, and got an idea. Park Avenue was just down the street, and there was a store he knew just across Park Avenue. If he could get there, he could lose these guys. He was sure of it. He scooted to the other side of the skyway and looked down. There was a big truck parked under the skyway. Klein could hop down from the skyway, away from the Rikers, down to the truck trailer, hop off the trailer, and get down to the street. He pulled out his pistol and fired a few shots down at the Rikers to make them focus on his current position, then ducked back out of sight and executed the plan. They kept firing at the skyway as he ran down the street, behind the trailer. By the time he reached Park Avenue, the Rikers could barely see him, if they noticed him at all. As Klein got to the corner, the shooting stopped. He looked back once as he turned the corner to see if they were running after him. He couldn't see them, and that meant they couldn't see him either. Klein saw that the Rikers had some bodies up by their ankles underneath the skyway. Poor bastards. He made a mental note to find some time to go back and cut those corpses down within the next day or two, get them buried, and give them rest. Klein moved across Park Avenue, moving between cars and trucks abandoned in the street, towards the clothing store on the other side. As he crossed the median, he saw another hostel in the street, facing away from him, walking. He couldn't tell if he was a Riker or a cleaner or what, but he could see that he had a big gun. Klein stopped, looked at the store, and saw the blinking red LED of a booby trap in the doorway. Taking out the hostel would be loud, but the explosion of the trap would be louder still. The Rikers were probably figuring out his deception by now, and might not be far behind. He thought about running behind the hostel, making it inside before the trap went off, but it was risky. And then he remembered there was another way. He ran southwest, away from the thug, and back towards 22nd Street, crossing Park Avenue, past a big pile of trash bags, to the corner of the building. A little ways down from the corner, there was a double doors open to the sidewalk. The doors led to an alley that went behind the clothing store, where they took deliveries. In the alleyway, there was a ladder up to the roof across from the store, and from there he could reach another alley, but anyone trying to follow him would have a hard time figuring out where he had gone. Klein climbed the ladder and came out onto a small roof with stark walls of brick rising all around him. The pain in his elbow was getting worse. He had to go easy when he climbed the ladder. Once he was on the roof, it was just about 15 feet to the north where the roof ended at a small alley. He jumped down to a small dumpster and then to the ground. The alley on this side was for tenants of the apartment building to bring in and take out their storage, plus for trucks to bring deliveries to the Most 24 convenience store and diner on either side of it. But Klein saw that it had been serving another purpose. There was at least 10 Sarah coffins here in the alley. A few were still stacked neatly in the corner, but someone had tipped over half of them. Body bags were strewn across the alley. Sarah personnel had prepped these bodies for pickup, but the pickup never came. Klein wondered if someone had risked getting infected to rob corpses as he stepped over the bodies. But when he turned around, he saw the walls of the alley had been plastered with about 100 missing posters. Maybe they hadn't been corpse looting. Maybe someone had just been looking to see if their loved one was among the dead. Klein stopped for a moment and went over to the posters. There were walls of missing posters like this all over Manhattan now. But this was an exceptionally large collection. Most of the people missing were probably dead. But Klein liked to look, just in case he saw someone dead or alive, and flashed on one of the missing faces. It was a picture of a woman and her little daughter. His own wife and daughter had been taken by the virus. Klein had been activated after the decontamination zone had collapsed. When they were taken there, he had been assured that they would receive the best possible care. But it was the last time he ever saw them. He hadn't been able to bury or mourn them. When his watch had started glowing, he had thrown it across the room. What good was saving what remains if his wife and daughter weren't going to be there? Why hadn't they activated him weeks ago when he could have made a difference? Mirror Man's voice popped into Klein's head again. You lock that shit down right now, asshole. You don't have time for this. Get in, find the antivirals, get out, and patch yourself up. Klein swallowed hard, turned away from the posters, and kept moving.
Thank you for listening to this section of Beyond Survival. Written by Matthew Shields, narrated by Mark A. Davis. If you enjoyed this, please like and subscribe. More chapters coming next week. Until then, stay frosty.